June 2nd, 1944. Southern England. Rain falls like static over a forest of radio masts near Dover. Inside a dim, smoke-filled hut, Sergeant William Bill Bletchley, one of the Royal Corps of Signals, wipes condensation off the dials of a wireless set. The hum of vacuum tubes fills the air, a low mechanical heartbeat under the sound of wind slapping the tin roof. On his clipboard, Fortitude South. No one in the hut is entirely sure what that means. But every night, they send coded messages, reports of tanks that don't exist, divisions that will never march. In London, across the channel from the greatest invasion force in history, British intelligence faces an impossible problem: how to convince Adolf Hitler to defend the wrong beach. For months, Allied High Command has hidden the real invasion. Operation Overlord behind a curtain of lies. The real target is Normandy, but the Germans must believe it will be Calais, the shortest route across the channel. If they guess correctly, tens of thousands of Allied soldiers could die before ever reaching the sand. And so, in an anonymous cluster of huts along the English coast, a ghost army is born. The order came down from the London Controlling Section, a secret branch of the War Office headed by Colonel John Bevan, a man who never fought a battle but would soon decide one. His weapon was not artillery or armor. It was belief. "Let them see what we want them to see," Bevan said during one of the first Fortitude meetings. Around the table sat officers from I-5, the U.S. Army's OSS, and the Royal Navy's Deception Division, each sworn to silence. Their task was to build an army of shadows, complete with radio chatter, supply requests, and the distant roar of non-existent engines. They called it Operation Fortitude South. The Americans contributed to the illusion by creating the first U.S. Operation Cobra had begun. And still, the 15th German Army, nearly 150,000 men strong, remained frozen at Calais, staring across the channel toward a phantom army that didn't exist. In Berlin, the situation was unraveling. At WWII headquarters, staff officers pored over intercepted Allied radio traffic, trying to make sense of the chaos. Reports from their own agents in northern France spoke of American and British armor punching deep into the countryside. It didn't fit their expectations. The Allies were supposed to be waiting for clear weather at Calais. But then, another radio burst arrived. Short, precise, and damningly convincing. It came from what the Germans believed was General Patton's headquarters near Dover. Request update on Calais assault readiness. Heavy air interference delaying embarkation schedule. Awaiting final confirmation of Operation 30. To the Germans, that meant one thing. The main invasion was still coming. They doubled down on their error. What they didn't know was that the transmission came from a small British operations room no larger than a barn. The nerve center of Operation Quicksilver, the radio component of Fortitude. There, surrounded by humming wireless sets and coils of cable, Captain Harold West leaned over the table, listening to the soft pulse of Morse code. He looked up at the wall map. Dozens of colored pins marked fake battalions. The 310th, 320th, 345th. None of them existed, but the pattern they formed was perfect. A voice crackled through the intercom. "Message acknowledged by enemy intercept, sir." West exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. "Then they still believe it." He turned to his team. "Keep it alive another week. Just one more. Now it's so shown. Already shy." That week would decide the fate of the Western Front. In Normandy, Patton's Third Army was preparing to break out of the Bocage country. His tanks were refueled. His men rested. But to Hitler and his generals, Patton was still across the channel. Army Group, Fusag, commanded, at least on paper, by General George S. Patton. The very man commanding the real assault was, in their minds, still waiting to lead an imaginary one. The deception had become a trap not just of logistics, but of psychology. For years, German intelligence had built an image of Patton as the Allies' most aggressive, most dangerous commander. He was the hero of North Africa, the firebrand of Sicily. To them, he had to lead the main invasion. Anything else made no sense. And so, when their analysts saw reports of Patton's army group massed at Dover, combined with the constant chatter on fake radio networks, they couldn't conceive that it was a lie. One Abrair officer reportedly said, "If Patton is in England, then the real invasion has not yet begun." But by August 1st, that belief became catastrophic. Patton's Third Army burst through the German lines at Avranches, sweeping south into Brittany and east toward the Seine. The front collapsed. Columns of German troops retreated through burning villages as Allied fighter bombers raked the roads. And still, the 15th Army waited, trapped by illusion. Intercepted German communications from August 2nd revealed their confusion. Enemy forces in Normandy advancing rapidly, awaiting final confirmation of Calais invasion before redeployment. They waited too long. By the time Hitler finally released the Calais divisions in mid-August, it was already over. The Allies had encircled tens of thousands of German troops in the Falaise pocket. The Western Front had been broken open. Meanwhile, back in England, the deception teams were finally ordered to stand down. Captain West removed his headset for the first time in days. The room was silent except for the distant hiss of static. He looked around at the men and women who had spent months weaving a tapestry of lies so convincing that it had fooled an empire. "Did they believe it till the end?" asked one of the younger operators. West nodded. To the Germans, Patton was the embodiment of Allied aggression, the American Rommel. If anyone would lead the cross-channel invasion, it had to be him. "To the very end," he said quietly. "And that's why Normandy stands." He reached over and switched off the transmitter. The soft hum died away, like the final heartbeat of a ghost. For the first time in months, the radio hut was quiet. Across the channel, Allied troops marched through the liberated towns of Normandy, greeted by villagers waving tattered flags and bottles of wine. To them, victory had been won by blood, courage, and steel, and it had. But in shadowed ruins and smoke-filled huts, another kind of war had been fought. One waged not with bullets, but with words. One that had turned fiction into a fortress. As trucks rumbled through the ruins, the soldiers couldn't have known that their survival depended on operators they'd never meet. People who had fought their battles through static and silence. They never saw the wooden tanks or the fake convoys. They never heard the phantom radio calls. But those invisible echoes had carried them to victory. And in Berlin, months later, a captured German officer would confess under interrogation. "We believed Calais until the end. Patton was the hammer. We just waited for the strike. Nation. Below." He paused. But it never came. The radio trick had done what no bomb or tank could. It had turned Hitler's certainty into his downfall. May 8, 1945, Reims, France. In a schoolhouse converted into a command post, the war in Europe ended. German officers, hollow-eyed and trembling, signed the documents of unconditional surrender beneath the watchful gaze of Allied commanders. Outside, rain tapped on the windows, soft, persistent, like static. So, his name became the cornerstone of the lie. The deception relied on sound, sight, and rhythm. The same sound that had once filled the huts at Dover. For the men and women who had lived in the shadows of deception, the war didn't end with fanfare or flags. Their victory had no parade. When the news of Germany's surrender reached England, the operators of Operation Fortitude were ordered to destroy their files, seal their logs, and speak of nothing. The deception that had saved thousands would remain buried in silence for decades. In one of those now abandoned huts, Sergeant Bill Bletchley stood alone. Dust hung in the air, caught in the gray light through cracked windows. The radios were gone, the walls stripped bare. Only faint stains remained where maps and frequency sheets had once been pinned. He ran his hand along the rough surface of the table, remembering the endless nights, the smell of burning cables, the scratch of pencil on logbooks, the tension of every false word transmitted. He could still hear the ghosts of his own Morse key clicking in the silence. On a shelf, someone had scrawled in chalk before leaving, Here we made an army for mayor. Bill smiled faintly. It was true. They had made an army out of nothing, and that illusion had turned the tide of the greatest invasion in history. When historians finally pieced together the truth in the decades after the war, they found that Operation Fortitude had held longer than anyone dared hope. German documents revealed that even 6 weeks after D-Day, Hitler still believed the main invasion was yet to come at Calais. Entire divisions, including armored NSS units, remained idle while the Allies liberated France. A deception that had begun as a desperate gamble became one of the most successful strategic operations in military history. But the true genius of Fortitude wasn't its machinery, its fake tanks, or its coded messages. It was psychological. It preyed on the most human weakness of all, certainty. The German command had built an empire on discipline and logic, but it was undone by its own conviction. The Allies didn't need to defeat Hitler's armies outright. They only had to convince him he was right. That irony remains one of the most haunting truths of the war. In 1946, during interrogation at Nuremberg, one former German intelligence officer admitted, "We saw what we wanted to see. Every battalion has a voice on the air. Orders, complaints, chatter about rations, weather reports. Every map, every signal, every report. It all confirmed our belief. We thought we were winning a battle of information. But in truth, we were fighting shadows." He paused, then added, "And the shadows won." Years later, when the veil of secrecy lifted, the world finally learned the names of those who had fought this hidden war. Men like Colonel John Bevan, who orchestrated the deception from a quiet London office, manipulating the flow of information with surgical precision. Spies like Juan Puyol Garcia, Garbo, who built an empire of fictional agents and fed Berlin an entire fantasy world. And the unsung operators, the Bills, the Heralds, the countless anonymous wireless men and women, whose words and signals became the pulse of a phantom army. They never fired a shot, but their work saved tens of thousands of lives. The legacy of Fortitude rippled far beyond 1945. Its lessons became the blueprint for modern psychological warfare, from Cold War disinformation campaigns to 21st century cyber operations. The idea that perception is a weapon was born not in laboratories or war rooms, but in that rain-soaked network of huts along the English coast. Even today, intelligence academies study Fortitude as the textbook definition of strategic deception. It proves that wars are not only fought with steel but with imagination. Standing on the cliffs of Dover decades later, Bill Bletchley, now an old man with silver hair and weathered hands, returned to where it all began. The wind still howled across the channel, carrying the same salt smell of 1944. He looked toward France, now peaceful, and closed his eyes. For a moment he could almost hear it again, the faint rhythm of Morse code, the heartbeat of a lie that saved a generation. "Funny," he murmured. "We fooled them with air." He turned to leave, his figure small against the wide gray sky. Behind him the sea shimmered, endless and quiet, the same water that had once divided truth from deception, life from death. The war had ended long ago, but its ghosts still whispered through the static of memory. And somewhere, deep beneath the weight of history, the greatest trick of World War II still lingered, not in the roar of engines or the clash of armies, but in the silent conviction that even the smallest lie told at the right moment can change the fate of the world. Now, those voices had to be fabricated. In huts like Bill Bletchley's, British operators tapped Morse code day and night, sending fake signals that painted a perfect illusion. Troop movements near Dover, convoys forming, requests for ammunition and fuel. Operators used call signs of entire regiments that didn't exist, built from fragments of real units so they'd withstand enemy analysis. German intelligence listening from across the channel recorded every pulse and burst of static. They mapped them on charts, tracing what looked like an enormous army massing in southeast England, poised to strike Calais. And it wasn't just airwaves. Across Kent, soldiers inflated rubber tanks, parked wooden trucks under camouflage nets, and laid down fake tire tracks leading to ghost depots. From the sky, it looked like the largest invasion force ever assembled. But to the men building this mirage, the mission felt absurd, even dangerous. On June 3, 1944, Captain Harold West of the Royal Engineers stood beside a line of dummy Shermans near Folkestone.I. "You really think the Germans will fall for this?" he muttered. His adjutant shrugged. "They want to believe what's easiest," he said. "We were just helping them do it." They all knew the stakes. If the Germans realized the truth, that Normandy, not Calais, was the target, they could move the 15th Army south within hours. The beaches of Omaha and Sword would be death traps. So the illusion had to hold. Late that night, a courier arrived from London with new code books. Operators replaced their frequency sheets, synchronized their clocks, and began broadcasting new unit transfer and fuel shortages. Every signal was a thread in a vast spiderweb of deceit, one that stretched from I-5 safe houses to Bletchley Park, where cryptanalysts monitored the German response through decrypted Enigma traffic. And the Germans were listening. By early June, Funkaufklärung, the German Radio Intelligence Corps had logged hundreds of transmissions confirming what they already believed: that a massive army under Patton was waiting at Dover, facing Calais. Even Hitler's Okidibello staff cited it in their briefings. Normandy, they argued, was only a diversion. Bevan's impossible plan was working. But deception is a fragile art. One broken illusion, one captured agent, one misplaced map, and the lie could collapse. At Southwick House, where Eisenhower and Montgomery coordinated the real invasion, the intelligence reports came in nightly. The deception needed to last not just until D-Day, but days afterward. Only then could the Allies secure their beachhead before the German reserves arrived. On June 5th, the eve of the invasion, the rain returned. Across southern England, real divisions waited in silence, while fake ones filled the air with noise. Morse code chattered like nervous teeth. Somewhere in France, German operators leaned over their receivers, hearing ghosts. Bill Bletchley adjusted his frequency one last time. "Transmit schedule confirmed, sir," he said softly. His officer nodded. "Then let's begin the invasion." But not the one the Germans were expecting. June 6th, 1944. Somewhere near Dover, the hum of the radio was constant, low and eerie, like the pulse of something alive. Sergeant Bill Bletchley leaned closer to the receiver as a faint voice echoed through the static. It was one of their own, a fellow operator at the decoy camp near Canterbury, reading out another false logistics report. Outside, dawn painted the cliffs in shades of gray-blue, and waves slammed hard against the channel rocks. Bill didn't know that across the sea, at that very moment, thousands of real Allied soldiers were storming the beaches of Normandy. His war wasn't fought with rifles or tanks, but with words, codes, and illusions. And in the invisible war of deception, every syllable mattered. That morning, reports began to pour into Bletchley Park. German field units in Calais were on full alert. Their radar operators had spotted increased signals traffic along the English coast opposite them, exactly as intended. The 15th Army, the most heavily armed German force in northern France, was preparing to repel an invasion that wasn't coming. But inside the British intelligence community, not everyone believed the ruse would hold. At the War Office, Colonel David Strangeways, a former field officer turned deception planner, worried that the Germans might see through the act too quickly. The Allies had launched the real invasion that morning. If the Germans realized it was genuine, they would shift their reserves from Calais within 48 hours, and the beaches of Normandy would be lost. "Every hour we buy," Strangeway said to his staff, "is another mile inland for our boys." His plan depended not only on fake radio signals, but on a chorus of carefully planted human lies, double agents, each one risking death to sustain the illusion. Among them was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, a Spanish double agent so convincing that the Germans once gave him the Iron Cross for his service to the Reich. Operating from a modest London flat, Garbo and his British handlers created an entire network of imaginary informants. Sailors, dock workers, even a cleaning lady who overheard troop movements. On June 9th, just 3 days after D-Day, Garbo sent a message to his German controller in Madrid. The main attack has not yet begun. The landing in Normandy is a feint designed to draw your forces away from the true target. The Pas de Calais. And schon. The Germans believed every word. His transmission, backed by the constant hum of fake radio chatter from Dover, reinforced the narrative that Hitler himself wanted to hear. And that was the key. For all of its military might, the German command structure was crippled by the Führer's obsession with Calais. Hitler had long been convinced that the Allies would cross the Channel at its narrowest point. The deception worked because it fit perfectly into his preconceptions, a psychological trap built on his own arrogance. In Berlin, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the commander-in-chief of the Western Front, grew uneasy. He had seen aerial photos showing massive Allied movement near Normandy, yet Hitler's staff dismissed them as diversions. Mein Führer, Rundstedt argued during a heated briefing on June 10th, we must move the 15th Army south, now! Hitler refused. The decisive blow will fall at Calais, he said flatly. Normandy is only a ruse. And so for days, German divisions, hundreds of tanks, thousands of men, waited in the wrong place. Allied bombers roared overhead unchallenged, and supply lines across Normandy grew stronger by the hour. Meanwhile, back in Dover, Bill and his team kept transmitting. Their orders were clear: keep the noise alive. Each message had to sound believable. Not too urgent, not too routine. They rehearsed military shorthand, mirrored authentic chatter patterns, and even inserted deliberate mistakes that made the transmission seem human. Troop column delayed due to road congestion. One message read, "I need fresh bread for 2nd Battalion mess?" Another joked. The Germans ate it up. But there were moments of doubt. Late on June 12th, during another endless night of transmission, one of the younger operators broke the silence. "Do you ever think," he murmured, "we're lying our way into history?" Bill didn't answer. He looked at the glowing tubes of the radio, the faint pulse of their deception. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but if it keeps them alive out there, it's worth every word." At that same hour, on the beaches of Normandy, the Allies were still struggling to link their beachheads. Tanks were bogged down in hedgerows. The wounded were piling up. And yet, the reinforcements that might have destroyed them were still waiting at Calais, deceived by voices carried through static. The entire invasion now rested on one of the strangest weapons of war ever conceived: belief in a fiction. By June 14th, the Germans began to suspect something. Reconnaissance flights over Dover reported suspicious stillness. No real ship movements, no smoke from active ports. Their analysts noted that some of the British radio signals followed repetitive, almost mechanical patterns. But even then, their conclusion wasn't that the army was fake. It was that the British were hiding something bigger. "Fusag must be conserving energy," one Abre report stated. "The main blow is still to come." They didn't realize the blow had already landed. As Allied divisions advanced deeper into Normandy, the deception team redoubled their efforts. Every lie had to hold. Every voice had to stay in character. Because in war, sometimes the difference between victory and defeat isn't firepower, it's imagination. And imagination that summer was on the side of the Allies. June 17th, 1944, Normandy, France. The beaches still reeked of oil and smoke. In the hedgerows beyond Carentan, exhausted Allied soldiers crouched behind shattered stone walls, rifles slick with sweat and rain. German counterattacks were fierce now, Panzer Lehr Division pressing from the south, artillery from the north. Every day they fought for inches. But even as the fighting raged in Normandy, somewhere far from the front, in an office deep inside the German High Command, Okobo, compound in Winsdorf, the radio deception still echoed. Reports from Patton's army continued to pour in. Each one described growing troop concentrations near Dover, new landing craft being assembled, fuel depots expanding. Hitler's intelligence officers, proud men with impeccable charts, pointed to the same conclusion. Normandy was still just a diversion. And so, at the exact moment when Allied soldiers on the beaches needed relief most desperately, the Germans themselves supplied it, by keeping their best divisions immobilized in Calais, waiting for an attack that would never come. Meanwhile, in southern England, Sergeant Bill Bletchley hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. The operators at his station were running continuous transmissions, round the clock. The air inside the hut was heavy with tobacco smoke and sweat, the kind that clung to every sleeve and dial. On the desk before him lay a signal order stamped top secret, Fortitude priority. It read, "Maintain illusion of Fusag offensive readiness. Reinforce call signs for 310th, 320th, and 345th Infantry Regiments. Simulate logistical build-up for landing craft assembly." And he must face up and to anyone outside that hut, it might have looked like a routine communication. To Bill, it was the heartbeat of an entire deception. He keyed in the sequence, transmitting a coded burst meant for German ears across the channel. Each word was pure invention. Fuel delays, weather holding, new divisions arriving from Southampton. He imagined the German analysts, pencil in hand, nodding to one another. Yes, they're still waiting to cross. The irony wasn't lost on him. Somewhere in France, men were dying to protect this illusion. Every successful lie came with a cost. At Bletchley Park, the codebreakers knew it too. By mid-June, Enigma decrypts confirmed what they had hoped. Hitler still refused to move the 15th Army. Messages intercepted between Berlin and Calais revealed his obsession with the phantom threat. Hold a current position. Await further confirmation of main landing at Pas de Calais. When this line reached the Allied Intelligence Command, a rare sound broke out. Quiet, disbelieving laughter. The impossible had worked. Colonel John Bevan, head of the London Controlling Section, read the decrypted messages aloud in his office, pacing the floor. "He's frozen his reserves," Bevan said, almost whispering. "He still thinks Patton's about to land at Calais." "Then Fortitude's done its job," replied his deputy. Bevan shook his head. "Not yet. Not until we're sure they'll stay frozen." "Besides, say, I too, I shall, For the next 2 weeks, the deception continued with surgical precision. The dummy camps in Kent expanded, filling with more inflatable Shermans and canvas aircraft. Local villagers saw columns of wooden trucks moving at night, their headlights flickering to simulate convoy movements. Even British police officers were told not to approach. Classified army exercises, they were told. Every sight, every sound, every radio pulse was part of a living illusion. But sustaining a lie at this scale took a toll. On June 20th, one of the operators at Bill's post accidentally repeated a coded sequence, a breach that could expose the deception. Panic rippled through the hut. Bill tore off his headset, double-checking the logbook. "Damn it, you sent the same timing twice," he snapped. The operator, barely 20, froze. "Sir, should I—" "Don't say a word," Bill interrupted. "We'll bury it with noise." For the next hour, they flooded the frequency with weather reports and overlapping chatter, enough to drown the mistake. It worked. The Germans never caught it. But for Bill, it was a reminder of how thin their thread of deception really was. Every fake signal was a bet with fate. Meanwhile, in Normandy, General Omar Bradley's troops had finally broken through at Saint-Lô. The breakout was coming. But to push deeper into France, the Allies needed time. Time that Operation Fortitude was still buying. And time was what the Germans were running out of. By early July, Allied aircraft controlled the skies, bombarding rail lines and bridges across northern France. Still, the 15th Army remained entrenched around Calais, forbidden to move. Inside Hitler's Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, His generals begged him to release the divisions. Mein Führer, our forces at Normandy are under unbearable pressure, Field Marshal von Kluge reported. We must counterattack now before they break through. Hitler slammed his hand on the map. No, Dottie. The real invasion is still to come. Normandy is the decoy. He ordered the 15th Army to stand by, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army to cross at Calais. And so, while Hitler clung to his delusion, the real war turned against him. By July 25th, the Allies launched Operation Cobra, breaking through German lines west of Saint-Lô. The deception had done its work. The reserves never came. From London to Dover, from signal huts to cipher rooms, the men and women of Fortitude realized something extraordinary. Their web of lies had changed the course of the war. But none of them would ever speak of it. Their names would never appear in medals lists or after-action reports. Their war had no monuments, only echoes of static fading into history. And yet, those echoes had fooled one of the most powerful military machines in the world. July 28, 1944, northern France. The smell of cordite hung over the shattered countryside. In the rolling fields outside Saint-Lô, blackened tanks lay smoldering in the hedgerows. Allied soldiers, faces gray with dust and fear, moved through the wreckage, rifles raised, boots sinking into churned mud. To the west, the thunder of engines rolled like a storm.